Power isn't about the volume of your voice, but the name on the deeds. It's a lesson my son and his wife learned the hard way. They thought my silence was weakness. They mistook my politeness for irrelevance. They wanted me gone from the business I built from sea-sprayed planks and iron will. I didn't just leave, I took the foundation with me. And I watched their hollow empire crumble into dust. This isn't a museum, Eleanor. Your memories don't pay the bills. I didn't expect gratitude, not after all these years of being gently, methodically erased, but I did expect a basic level of decency. The morning I walked into the Mariner's Trove, the air smelled of salt, pine, and fresh linen, a scent I had personally curated 2 decades ago. The pale Maine light streamed through the large bay windows I had picked out with my late husband Arthur. I was carrying a basket of warm blueberry scones, a Tuesday morning habit I couldn't seem to break. My son, Leo, and his wife, Isabella, were huddled over the main counter, their voices a low, angry buzz. I waited, a ghost in my own creation, until Isabella turned to grab a stack of invoices. "Sweetheart," I began, my voice soft, "I noticed this invoice from the Portland Weavers seems to be a duplicate from last month. You might want to double-check before you pay it twice." Isabella didn't look at me. She slammed the file onto the polished mahogany counter, the sound cracking through the quiet store. "Oh my God," she said, her voice loud enough to make the young clerk at the front register jump. "Are you seriously questioning our bookkeeping now?" Leo flinched but remained silent, his gaze fixed on a knot in the wooden floorboards. His silence was a language I had become fluent in. "I was only trying to help," I said, the basket of scones suddenly feeling heavy in my hands. She cut me off, her voice rising with a venom that felt startlingly personal. "Do you have any idea what it takes to run this place in the modern world?" she hissed, stepping closer. "The logistics, the online marketing, the international sourcing? You think because you sold some rope and driftwood in 1995 that you understand a global supply chain?" The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Leo's shoulders hunched. The clerk began typing furiously, pretending not to listen. I felt my cheeks flush, a hot wave of shame and anger. Isabella wasn't finished. She gestured around the store with a sweep of her arm, a queen surveying a kingdom she believed she had conquered. "This isn't a charity, Eleonora. We don't need you showing up with your baked goods and your opinions. You are not an owner anymore. You are a dependent, a leech feeding off a legacy you no longer contribute to." The word leech landed with the force of a physical blow. A triumphant, cruel smile played on her lips. She had finally said it, the ugly thought she had been nurturing for years. Then came the final dismissive command. "Go home to your quaint little garden and let the professionals handle this." A nervous chuckle escaped one of the younger stock boys. Before he caught my eye and looked away, his face crimson. No one else moved. No one spoke up, especially not Leo. I looked at my son, my only child, and he refused to meet my gaze. He just stared at the floor as if it held all the answers he was too cowardly to find himself. That was the moment something inside me broke. Or perhaps it was the moment something was finally forged into steel. I turned without a word. I walked past the shelves Arthur and I had built by hand, past the brass ship's bell we used to ring for big sales, past the framed photographs of the store's early days that Isabella had moved to a dimly lit hallway. I walked out of the store and into the bracing coastal air. I did not cry. I did not raise my voice.
But a quiet seismic shift occurred deep within me. They saw an old woman, a relic clinging to memories. They had forgotten, or perhaps Isabella had never bothered to learn, that while they managed the day-to-day operations, I had never relinquished true control. My name was still on the LLC's founding charter. My name was still the primary signatory on the master business account. My name was still on the deed to the building itself. I had let them lead. I had given them space. But I had never, ever signed it all away. That afternoon, I unlocked the old oak filing cabinet in my guest room. It smelled of cedar and thyme. I pulled open the top drawer, and there it was, nestled in a folder labeled The Mariner's Trove Founding Documents. My name, Eleanor Evans, was there in bold, clear ink. My signature was on every foundational page. I had stepped back, but I had never stepped out. They thought they owned the house. They had forgotten I owned the land beneath it, and the land was about to move. You don't build a life's work by accident. Arthur and I started with a loan we could barely afford and a stall at the end of the Port Blossom Pier. We sold authentic nautical charts, hand-tied knots, and sturdy fishing gear. He handled the sourcing, charming old sea captains into parting with their treasures. I handled the customers, learning their stories, their needs, their names. We worked from dawn till dusk, our hands raw from rope and our faces chapped by the sea wind. We grew from the stall to a small rented shack, from the shack to the storefront on Main Street. By the time Leo was born, the Mariner's Trove was a local institution, known for quality and honesty. We never became wealthy, but we built a life, a reputation, and a legacy. When Arthur passed from a sudden heart attack one crisp autumn morning, the store became my sanctuary, my connection to him. Every polished brass compass, every stack of linen napkins held a memory. I ran it alone for years, finding solace in the familiar rhythms of inventory and commerce. Leo came back home at 25, after a failed attempt at a software startup in Boston. He was adrift, and when he asked to help at the store, my heart swelled with hope. A full circle, a continuation. I imagined him carrying on the legacy, and for a while he did. He was smart, good with technology, and brought in new ideas for online sales. I encouraged him, gave him more and more responsibility. When he married Isabella, a sharp, ambitious woman from a wealthy family, I thought she would be a boon. She had a business degree and a hunger to prove herself. I began to step back, trusting them. I stopped coming in every day. I let them handle the suppliers, the hiring, the strategy. I remained the primary signatory on the main business accounts, the one that paid the major bills and the mortgage on the building. It was a safety net I'd put in place long ago on the advice of a wise lawyer. No one ever asked me to remove my name, and I never offered. I trusted my son. That was my mistake. The night after Isabella's outburst, I didn't sleep. I retrieved the thick stack of bank statements the business account sent to my home address each month. Statements I had for years only skimmed. Now I read them. I read every line. At first it looked normal. Payroll, utilities, large payments to our trusted suppliers. But then I saw it. A recurring monthly payment, always for several $1,000s, to a company I'd never heard of, Oceanic Lifestyle Consulting. There were other smaller payments to vendors like Coastal Ambiance Curators and Maritime Branding Solutions. These were not our suppliers. These were not companies Arthur and I had ever done business with. My heart began to pound, a slow, heavy drumbeat of dread. I cross-referenced the vendor names with our official supplier list. Nothing. I looked them up online. Oceanic Lifestyle Consulting had a glossy website full of stock photos and corporate jargon, but its registered address was a P.O. box in Delaware. The other companies were similarly vague, untraceable ghosts. I pulled out the last 2 years of statements and spread them across my dining room table. A pattern emerged. The payments to these ghost companies started shortly after Isabella took over the books. They were structured to be just under the amount that would trigger an automatic review. This wasn't sloppy bookkeeping. This was deliberate. This was theft. She was siphoning money from the business, my business, Arthur's legacy, and hiding it in plain sight through a network of shell companies. And Leo?
Alistair, I said when he answered. It's Eleanor Vance. I need you to dust off an old file. We met the next day in his office, overlooking the harbor. I laid out the bank statements, the list of shell companies, and the founding documents that proved my sole ownership of the LLC that legally owned the Mariner's Trove, the business, the brand, and the building. He examined everything with a practiced eye, his expression growing more grim with each page. When he was finished, he looked at me over the top of his reading glasses. She's been bleeding you dry, Eleanor. This is textbook embezzlement. Sophisticated, but arrogant. I don't want a public spectacle, Alistair. I don't want to send my own son to jail, I said, my voice steady. I just want it to stop. I want to take back what is mine. Alistair nodded, a small, grim smile touching his lips. A quiet coup then. I like it. Here's what we do. Our plan was a series of precise legal maneuvers executed with the cold efficiency of a naval blockade. Step 1. Alistair, acting on my behalf as the primary LLC owner, contacted the bank's fraud department. He presented proof that Isabella, as an employee and secondary account user, had been making unauthorized payments to unvetted, suspicious entities. He didn't have to prove theft, only a severe breach of fiduciary duty. The bank, fearing liability, immediately froze her access to all business accounts. Step 2. I walked into the bank myself, and as the sole owner and primary signatory, withdrew the entire operating capital, every last cent, and transferred it to a new protected trust account under my name only. It was perfectly legal. It was my company's money. Step 3. Alistair drafted and sent a formal, legally binding letter to Leo and Isabella via registered mail. It informed them that due to discovery of significant financial irregularities and potential misconduct, an independent forensic audit of the past 5 years of operations had been initiated effective immediately. The phone rang that evening at 8:15 p.m. It was Isabella. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text from Leo. Mom, what is happening? Call me. I ignored it. I poured a small glass of sherry and sat on my porch watching the lighthouse beams sweep across the dark water. The first pieces were in motion. The second call came the next morning. It was Isabella again. And this time I answered, holding the phone slightly away from my ear. What the hell did you do? She screamed, her voice a shrill symphony of panic and fury. The accounts are frozen. We can't pay our suppliers. Our payroll check for Friday is going to bounce. I took a slow sip of my morning tea. I'm not doing anything, Isabella, I said calmly. I'm simply protecting my assets. Your assets? This is our company. Leo has poured his life into this place. No, Isabella, I said, my voice as cold and clear as the winter sea. It is my company. You are borrowing it, and your lease has expired. There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the line.
I could almost hear the gears grinding in her head as the reality of her situation began to dawn on her. You can't do this, she stammered. I already have, I replied. And then I gently ended the call. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel cruel. I felt clean, as if I had finally scrubbed away years of accumulated grime. For years, they had treated me like a relic. But a relic, however old, is still an artifact of the original. And the original always holds the most value. She wanted me gone, and I had obliged. I had simply taken the entire stage with me when I made my exit. A business dies not with a bang, but with a series of quiet, unanswered phone calls. Vendors started demanding payment for shipments that were now sitting in limbo. The staff, realizing their paychecks were not coming, stopped showing up. The store's website suddenly went offline. The front door remained locked, a hastily scrawled "closed for maintenance" sign taped to the glass. On Monday, Leo came to my house. He stood on my porch, looking not like a business owner, but like a lost boy. When I opened the door, he looked at me with his father's eyes, full of a pain he didn't know how to articulate. "Mom," he whispered, his voice cracking. "We're ruined. Isabella, she's a wreck. We're going to lose everything." He finally looked directly at me, a desperate plea in his eyes. "Why are you doing this to us? We're your family." I didn't answer. I walked to my desk, retrieved the original leather-bound folder containing the company's founding documents, and handed it to him. He opened it, his hands trembling slightly. He stared at the first page, at the clear, strong signature of Arthur Vance, and beside it, my own, Eleanor Vance, founder, principal. "I never signed it over," I said quietly. "You never asked. You just assumed. But we worked so hard." "You worked hard on a house you did not build," I said, my voice firm, but not unkind. "And you stood by silently while your wife tried to burn it down for the insurance money. You cannot disrespect the foundation and expect the walls to stand, Leo." He looked down at the papers, at the ink that time had not faded. And I saw the final, crushing weight of understanding settle upon him. He had not just lost a business. He had lost his way. He had traded his legacy for a mirage. And now the desert was all that was left. He left an hour later, leaving the folder on my table. My final move was not of revenge, but of preservation. I called Silas Croft, a man who ran a similar maritime shop in a town up the coast. He was an old competitor of Arthur's, a stubborn, honest man who, like us, had built his business on handshakes and integrity. Isabella had once called him a dinosaur. I sold him everything, the business, the building, the brand, for a fair price. I had only two conditions. The first was that no member of my family was ever to be hired or consulted. The second was that he had to add a new line to the sign out front. A week later, I drove past the store. A fresh coat of dark blue paint adorned the trim. A new sign hung above the door, the Mariner's Trove, and beneath it an elegant gold leaf were the words Silas had promised: "Founded on integrity." In the window, he had placed a small framed photograph of Arthur and me, taken on the day we first opened. Smiling, windblown, and full of a future we could not yet see. That night on my porch, I thought about the nature of legacy. It is not a thing you can seize or demand. It must be honored, tended to, and respected. Isabella wanted me to disappear, and in the end, her entire world had vanished. Not because I was cruel, but because I was the owner. I had simply reclaimed my property, locked the doors, and handed the keys to someone who understood their value. The quiet came like a bomb. My days settled into a peaceful rhythm of gardening, reading, and long walks by the sea. The drama that had consumed my life faded into a distant echo. The world I had built was no longer mine to worry about, and the peace that replaced it was more valuable than any profit margin. One afternoon, my neighbor's daughter, a bright young woman named Chloe, stopped by while I was weeding my hydrangeas. "I heard you sold the store," she said, her expression a mixture of curiosity and awe. "My mom said the new owner is great, but that it'll never be the same without a Vance there." I smiled, snipping a faded bloom. Sometimes a name needs to rest. "But after everything your son and his wife did, you don't seem angry." "Anger is a rocking chair, my dear," I told her, repeating a phrase Arthur used to love. "It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere." I looked out toward the ocean, the waves rolling in with a timeless, steady rhythm. They thought my silence meant I had given up. They didn't understand. Silence isn't an absence of power.